So basically, you got to work directly with that part of you to show it what the consequences of doing so are in a very conscious way, and to show it alternatives. These are some alternatives. Like what? Like, let's do a deal here, like, and a really good one. Meaning, it's important to me, speaking to this part of you, it's important to me that you don't feel like I'm just gonna ignore your boundaries. I don't want to do something damaging. I just want to know where the line actually is.
Yeah. Draw out the line.
Yeah. I think that we so often don't have conversations with ourselves like that. Like sometimes it's almost like there's so much autopilot that you just get all wrapped up in this way of being where. So, I mean, is it that simple to really just be like talking and communicating to ourselves and our sides? What are some of the best things we can do to actually change these patterns?
Yep. I mean, my favorite tool for people to use, especially when they're on this path of really wanting to live a conscious life, is parts work. It's why I started teaching it so aggressively, more in recent years, because, I became aware that people just don't see themselves as that stained glass window, which is a very important thing, to see yourself that way, to understand that when you make a decision, there are multiple aspects of you that are involved in that decision. That's why we experience the sensation of being torn, right? Like, you may have a side that's like, I want to be the best husband possible, and a part that's like, why the hell do I have to answer to any people? I'm sick of it. Why does every decision have to accommodate everyone? So you feel those internal, It's really important to be able to separate out those aspects and dive into them. That's the consciousness work. It's almost like each part of you is its own cave within an ocean. So you're like diving all the way into one and exploring it fully, and then like diving all the way into the other one. And when you do that, you gain so much more self-awareness. Those open windows, basically, for how to make situations work, and the information for what you're really about comes to the surface, and then you can act consciously with those things. So yeah, parts work is literally one of the most important things that you can do on that level. The other thing that's super important is to actually experience your feelings. And most people don't do that. They don't. I just released a video on this because of the fact that it's so incredibly important for people to learn how to emotionally experience. Because most people, when they don't understand what their emotions are for, and they've got like a resistant relationship to their emotions, when those emotions come up, they're supposed to move through the body. That's how emotions work. But we don't let that happen. We're like immediately reactive to the emotion, and then essentially it has no capacity to move through us and deliver the information contained within that emotion.
Yeah. I actually am going through that right now, where I suppressed my feelings my whole life. So I'm learning like emotional regulation and how to, properly handle this intensity that's coming up. And it's not easy, but I'm giving it my best, and I'm busting my ass, and I'm going to do it. My question is, does how we handle or process or grow through our ancestral trauma here on Earth influence what happens to us in this afterlife? Do you believe? I'm curious.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we got
through every action that you are taking, you're dictating what you're matched to after this life. It's not like, law of mirroring or law of attraction applies only to this life.
Right.
It's active in terms of the process of reincarnation, which is part of why, when people really get into unconscious patterns that they just perpetuate, you're kind of like, oh God.
Yeah.
I hope you know what you're matched to. Because, until you develop full consciousness to be able to actually be in choice and free will, your incarnations are a mix between choice and determinism.
Uh-oh. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
So that the last thing you said made me just think about, I got to like thinking about my own life. I actually had a question that was good, but thinking about your life as a mix of those two things. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to gather myself.
Yeah.
Together. You have
No,
no
so
idea.
I have a question because, I see so many people out there struggling intensely, right? And clearly, you and I, we are aware of ancestral trauma, but there's people out there that are dying, like, because they're going through all this stuff and they don't know that maybe it's not their fault, like maybe this was just handed to them. Like, how do we support people that are struggling with this intense trauma, ancestral trauma, that they don't even know? They don't even know why it's happening to them. How can we be of support?
Figure out what it is that somebody most deeply wanted and become an advocate to that. It doesn't need to be complicated.
Like that.
I'm making people aware of this ancestral aspect, not because it is 100% necessary for a person to line up with what is in alignment for them. This is just an incredible tool and more information and more awareness, which just is like the better it gets, the better it gets. If I was dealing with somebody who is suffering immensely, I wouldn't have a conversation about ancestral trauma, and I certainly wouldn't have a conversation with them about the fact that it's not their fault. Why? Because sometimes that's the most painful thing, especially when people are suffering the most. Oh, great. So like what? I just came down here and was just given all this crap, and like it doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. I was gonna get screwed anyways. It's very, you'll see that in the furthest reaches of victimization, there's a searching for blame, because in blame you can do something. So it depends where somebody falls on this line of being victimized, whether it's an empowering thought, this isn't my fault, or whether it's a disempowering thought.
Yeah. Say somebody's abusive, right? Say like, you're out there and you had a dad that was abusive, and you have his dad was abusive, and it's a chain of abuse, ancestral chain of abuse.
Yep.
I would give them a hug as the opposite. Is that like, what are we giving that person?
What you would give is the opposite of abuse, which is trust. Trust is the antithesis to abuse. Trust is you can rely on me to act in your best interests. So it's a difficult thing. And to be honest with you, oftentimes when people come from really intense levels of abuse, the first relationship that they can really have is a therapeutic one. Why? Because it needs to be somebody who can reliably demonstrate I'm here for your best interest, which is much easier when your whole life is not influenced by what that person is doing. And so there's going to be less reactivity and more unconditionality.
Wow. That's like really important to anyone listening, just the importance of having a therapist. I mean, I'm sure it's not just for that specific abuse situation that would apply, that a therapist can provide a lot for people.
Oh, you guys. Okay, so like full disclosure, there are some terrible therapists out there. However, a good therapist is worth their weight in absolute gold. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm so interested in regarding this destigmatization of therapy and mental anything is that it's my belief every person walking this earth needs somebody in that role. We may use the word therapist nowadays, before it was a sage. You need somebody on the outside that can be a good reflective mirror and offer some of those experiences, which a person whose life is completely tied into us may not be able to offer because of the level of pain they get put in by virtue of what we are doing.
Yeah, it makes me think about like how you're talking about this parts stuff, and how I was kind of referring to how I went through this process back in the day, and I looked at all these different things. But I might have only looked at my fears and resentments from certain parts, not from like the total, And so,
he gets it.
Yeah. So it's cool to be thinking like this. So
it makes me I really respect this group of like spiritual people, especially the one woman. And she talks a lot about almost like you would become the kind of person that could deal with anything or not internalize people's anger, or just be there as this present, powerful source of peace. And I wonder what you think about that in terms of, I think a lot of us have probably family members that can kind of damage us to a certain degree and things like that. Do you feel like the right thing to do is to like support and love people that kind of can be a little harmful, or just there's some people, and I think a lot of people in the sort of new age kind of world, it's like, I'm cutting you off. You're inconvenient to my life. You don't make me feel good. I'm cutting you off. So what do you feel like is the way to operate? with those situations?
It's so case by case because honestly, so many people are not in the position to be able to be there for people who are damaging them in that way. They're not able to put themselves in a position where they don't get damaged in that way. So would I advise a person like that to continue even if they're getting damaged? No. Do I feel like this millennial Gen Z attitude, honestly, of we don't really need like every relationship, so we can just like be done now? Do I think that's healthy? No, I don't. We've never been more unhealthy regarding our unwillingness to recognize our interdependence and our need for each other, and therefore the effort with which we must put towards relationships. It's a very slippery slope to give you like an absolute in every that applies to every example, right? I also want to mention that I feel like we're incredibly under-resourced. I'm never going to get off this, you guys. I'm going to be in my 80s and be like, we're under-resourced. All right. When we were living tribally, we didn't have as much of this dynamic happening. When you've got a single family household, even an extended family dynamic, you've got such a limit in terms of the amount of minds and energies that can go towards helping someone. So inherent in a lot of your questioning is like, they don't have anyone but us. And I'm like, in what universe is that healthy for a human? I mean, if we were living in more of a tribal type dynamic, let's say that you had a really hard time with a sister of yours or something. There would be some other woman who's in this tribe who doesn't have that same problem with this person and therefore can have a whole different interaction with them, can probably get them further, can help them to understand you, can facilitate stuff between the two of you. And you're not just sort of out there in the wind, both having been traumatized and both being a super reactive trigger for each other.
It's so true. And I'm just thinking like, I go to the gym, it's like 100 people there and everyone's just walking around like, like stone faced, like maybe a couple people will say hi to each other. Like, it just seems like it's like everyone's just like not friendly. And so how do we go about like recreating those old communities that are actually like, it seems like trust is fragmented, like in almost an unrepairable way.
Well, my answer is you got to become the antidote to whatever it is that you don't like about the world. So it's about being defiantly for whatever it is you want. You got to actually be that. So let's say that I am, because I am like you. I notice this and it drives me nuts. I notice that everybody's in their own world. I will be the person who's not in my own world. I'm going to be the one who talks to people when I'm in the line. I'm going to be the person who invites people over. And I'm going to be the type of person who really puts it out there that intentional community is the way that I want to live. I'm going to buy land where that can happen. It's just unashamedly going for what it is that you want to be corrected about the world rather than adapting yourself to the world. And that's where I see most people going. Most people, they run into an unfriendly world and they're like, God, I don't want to be hurt by rejection. And so I'm going to just be in my own world too. And then you just became part of the problem.
Right.
But that we could say that there has been kind of the charge since the beginning of humanity. The charge is you have come to a world where this place is not perfect. A lot of it is an antithesis to health. Are you going to adapt to a shark eat shark world by becoming a shark? Or are you going to become the antidote to the shark eat shark world? You have been charged with this challenge. It is a lot easier said than done. But I'm telling you, this is what I wish people would understand. If you're sitting here telling me, it bothers me that everyone's in their own world. Do you know how many people have told me this about gyms?
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that just having conversations like this, I've got at least 5 men that have said the same thing. Chances are, one of those times you're going to walk up to a guy at the gym and be like, hey, I just really like this.
Yeah, I like your muscles.
The chances are that, some of them will be like, what does this guy want from me? But there's going to be one of them who feels just like you, who's like, that was so cool. He talked.
Want to do some jumping jacks, bro?
I like your pump.
Yeah. I'm going into the gym tonight. It's going to be.
I may lose Kyle tonight.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
I'm thinking about just everything that does become a desire. How some of it can be maybe the things you inherit, some of it can be your childhood. And I feel like in the spiritual community, we talk so much about desire. Almost some people believe that's like just the reason why you're here. You're just a desire machine, satisfying your own desire. How do you feel that desire is related to actually having a spiritual life? To you, is the point of life just desire and quenching it? Or
that's not the only point. One of the main points for life in this game of self-awareness, which is really the universe becoming aware of itself, is desire. Desire tells the universe how and where to expand. So desire is something that you can't make go away, right? The closest you can get is to desire to be without desire. #Buddhism, okay? So desire is something that we have to form this deep relationship with. But where we start to get into trouble is when we go into a state of narcissism with our desires. We've come into a consensus reality. Part of what we're here to do is to recognize oneness, which means that, I'm not existing as an island into my own desires. You also have desires as well. And if I'm going to practice love, the art of love, which is to take you as a part of me, your desires must matter to me. And if they run counter to mine, we have real grounds for expansion. We've got a real rub. We've got to practice the art of a win-win.
Do you think that there is something spiritual, though, about not attaching to your wants and your don't wants and your preferences?
It's not. You use the word spiritual, but you don't mean that word. When you say the word spiritual, what do you mean? Is there something spiritual to not? It's almost like virtue. Virtue is a closer vibration to what you're saying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think being spiritual is probably just actually being in your joy and in your love and happiness. So I've just been thinking lately about how much unhappiness being super attached to wants and not wants.
Can I redefine something for you?
Sure.
I think it'll help you going forward. So when we use the word spiritual, what we mean is non-physical. So all it means to live a spiritual life is that you are aware of the non-physical aspect of self. That's it. We could say that when you are aware of a non-physical self, all of a sudden that brings into and with it an awareness of pre-birth intention. Now this means that now if I'm living my life in alignment with pre-birth intention, I'm now living a spiritual life, right? But the reason why it's so incredibly important to weed this out is because spirituality in general as a catch-all term has become almost like a different way of saying the stuff that religious people were saying in the Christian movements and all these other prominent religions, where they're trying to get you to do what is good and right. So it's really not about spiritual, it's about good and right. And I think it's important for people to look at those things and question those things, whether something is good or right. So when you ask that question, and that's why I kind of started to hone it a little bit, is because it very much reads like, if we let go of our attachment to our desires, do we live a good or a right life or a better life, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think that I regard just being in like a loveful, like a happy, like a true, I think if I was truly connected with the spiritual, it's that sense of love, of happiness. And sometimes I think that the more I try to chase happiness, the less happy I am. Obviously, pretty trite.
Yeah, it's really important to stay here because so many people are stuck exactly where you're stuck. The first thing I do want to say is that living a spiritual life is not the same as living a happy life. Love is the most difficult practice of all. To love something is to take something as a part of yourself. That includes the things you hate the most. That includes your enemy. It's one of the most painful things you will ever do in your life. It includes expanding wide enough to take the universe as a part of yourself. That means every truth. Swallowing every truth is so painful, especially given the reality of where, especially if you're focused on humanity, the reality of where humanity is not good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a bunch of teachers. So I don't want you to mistake happiness with spirituality. Where I feel like people can experience greater fulfillment by virtue of living a spiritual life is because you're so deeply connected with something that goes so beyond your minute individual day-to-day life.
Mm.